It's the end of World War II. Nazi Germany is in ruins. Allied forces sweep across Europe, liberating cities, arresting war criminals, and uncovering horrors never meant to be seen. But behind the chaos, another mission is unfolding, one far more secretive. A race is on. A race not for territory, but for minds. In places like Peenemünde, Nazi scientists had developed the V2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It travelled faster than the speed of sound and struck London without warning. No sirens, no defence, just destruction. The man behind it? Wernher von Braun, SS officer, Nazi engineer, and, in a twist stranger than fiction, the man who would later lead NASA's moon mission. This wasn't an isolated case. Over 1,600 of Hitler's top scientists, experts in rocketry, chemistry, aviation, even mind control, were secretly brought to America after the war, not to face trial, but to work for the US government. It was called Operation Paperclip. A classified US military program that smuggled Nazi scientists into the country, scrubbed their pasts, and turned them into assets. These weren't low-level technicians. Many had built weapons of mass destruction and worked side by side with the SS. They were given new identities, government paychecks, and in many cases a hero's welcome. Some would go on to shape America's missile systems. Others would launch us into space. This is the story of the men America chose to protect, not because of who they were, but because of what they knew. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany in 1945, intelligence teams had one mission: grab the brains before the Soviets did. Nazi scientists were scattered across the collapsing Reich, many hiding, some surrendering, and others hoping to cut deals. The Soviets were closing in on the same facilities. Stalin wanted the rocket tech too. In some cases, the same scientists were courted by both sides, just days apart. America called its effort Operation Overcast, but the name didn't stick. Soon after, it was rebranded with a more innocuous name, Operation Paperclip, named for the small metal clips used to attach the scientists' files to their forged personnel records. Most of those files included Nazi affiliations, which the US government quietly overlooked or erased. Some of these scientists had been more than just party members. Many were active collaborators, working in facilities where slave labour from concentration camps was the norm. At Mittelwerk, prisoners from Dora Mittelbau were forced to build VA-2 rockets in underground tunnels, starved, beaten, and worked to death. All while men like von Braun visited and reviewed progress. He later claimed ignorance, but survivor testimony told another story. Still, the US military saw only one thing: an opportunity. The Cold War had already begun, and America couldn't afford to let this knowledge fall into Soviet hands. The ethical questions could wait. First, the scientists had to be secured, and America didn't just want a few, they wanted all of them. In late 1945, the first wave of Nazi scientists arrived on American soil. Most were brought quietly through East Coast ports, then shipped out to remote military installations, far from curious eyes or the press. Fort Bliss in Texas became ground zero. Dozens of former Third Reich engineers, including Wernher von Braun and his V2 team, were sent here to resume their research, only now under a new flag. At White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, captured Evo 2 parts were reassembled using Nazi blueprints. The same rockets that once terrorised London now roared across the desert skies, tested by the very men who designed them for Hitler. The program was called Operation Hermes. It marked the beginning of a new era, the US missile program, born directly from Nazi technology. Government memos show officials were fully aware of these scientists' Nazi ties. Some were even classified as ardent Nazis or security risks. But almost every time, the response was the same: retained for further use. Backgrounds were sanitized, files redacted, affiliations rewritten. One scientist, Arthur Rudolph, who oversaw slave labor at Mittelwerk, was granted US citizenship and later honored by NASA. To the public, these men were brilliant emigres, helping America catch up to Soviet tech. But behind closed doors, they were prized assets in a silent war, one where morality had become a luxury. By the 1950s, the once top-secret paperclip scientists were slowly emerging into the public eye. no longer as former Nazis, but as visionaries. They were now leading America's most ambitious technological projects. Wernher von Braun's team developed the Redstone rocket, the first US ballistic missile and the launch vehicle that would eventually carry America's first satellite into space. Explorer 1 in 1958. The same man who had once accepted awards from Hitler was now receiving funding from the Pentagon and shaking hands in the Oval Office. But Paperclip wasn't just about rockets. Other scientists were folded into top-secret programs, from spy plane development to chemical and biological weapons research. Some worked for the CIA under shell companies. Others ran labs at Fort Detrick, where they explored mind control, nerve agents, and tools of psychological warfare. The Cold War didn't just escalate, it mutated. To the public, this was a time of American triumph. We were leading the space race, countering Soviet threats and developing weapons to keep the peace. But in the shadows, it was the work of men who had once built weapons for the Third Reich. America hadn't just borrowed German technology, it had adopted German expertise, regardless of its origin. The ethical line had blurred, and the Cold War demanded results. For decades, the truth about Operation Paperclip remained buried, shielded by layers of red tape, national security loopholes, and carefully crafted narratives. But by the 1970s, cracks started to form. Investigative journalists like Linda Hunt began filing Freedom of Information Act requests. What they uncovered was shocking. A web of classified files proving that known Nazis, some charged with war crimes, had not only been protected, but celebrated. One scientist, Dr. Hubertus Strughold, widely known as the father of space medicine, had been linked to chilling experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Yet in the US, he was honoured with NASA awards and even had a medical library named after him. Others, like Kurt de Boos, former Nazi SS officer, became directors of US space centres. In some cases, their Nazi affiliations weren't hidden. They were simply ignored. When congressional inquiries began probing the depths of the Paperclip program, the reaction was often muted. The defence? That these men were essential to beating the Soviets. That it was a necessary evil. It was a logic born from fear. America believed it couldn't afford the luxury of conscience, not when the enemy had their own rocketmen, their own spies, and their own ambitions. And it wasn't just America. The Soviets too scooped up Nazi engineers in what they called Operation Osoaviakim, a parallel program to harness German brains for communist power. Two superpowers, one race, and the unsettling reality that World War II never really ended. It just changed shape. Today, Wernher von Braun is remembered as the architect of the moon landing, a pioneer of modern space travel. But how many people know his journey started in the ashes of Nazi Germany? The rockets that took us to the stars were born in tunnels soaked with suffering. Thousands died constructing the V2, enslaved under brutal conditions, buried beneath concrete and secrecy. Operation Paperclip was more than just a scientific gamble, it was a moral transaction. The US traded accountability for advancement, justice for strategic gain. It wasn't just a footnote in Cold War history, it was a blueprint for how far nations will go and what they're willing to look past in the name of winning. And the consequences still echo today. The line between ethics and national interest hasn't just blurred, it's often disappeared entirely. It makes you wonder, what else has been justified? What other deals have been made under the cover of darkness, buried in classified archives and sealed by silence? Because if the story of Operation Paperclip teaches us anything, it's that history isn't just written by the victors, it's edited by them too. We went to the moon, but the path we took was paved with shadows. And now that you know the story, the question becomes, was it worth it?